Hello, my name is Matthew Carmona, and I'm a professor at the Bartlett School of Planning at UCL. And today I want to talk to you about a new book, Urban Design Governance, Soft Powers and the European Experience, which is being published by UCL Press. And having listened to me, if you're interested, you can download a free copy from the QR code or the link there on the screen, or indeed you can purchase a copy from that same link. Now, like any book, the evolution of this one represents a long journey. Officially, we might record the start as the summer of 2018, almost 4 years ago, as I sit here today, when I was first approached by Frederick Saliers of UN Habitat. There's Frederick on the screen. Now, Frederick had seen my earlier work on the governance of design in the UK, which resonated with conversations that he was having with colleagues in the European Commission. And those conversations eventually led to the EU-funded Urban Maestro project that began in 2019 and culminates in the publication of this book. But for me, the real journey began 30 years ago, when I first became fascinated with how governments intervened to try and shape better quality built environments. Now, much of the work I did in the first 10 years of my career is now long forgotten by everybody except me. But the point is that a book of this nature represents a culmination, or perhaps more accurately, a stopping off point on a long research journey in which ideas only gradually emerge and are tested. Some of the ideas go back to my PhD, for example. And of course, my personal research journey is just one of 3 that feeds into the book, the other 2 being my co-authors, João Bento and Tommaso Gabrielli. And beyond us, the real urban maestros were the larger team at UN Habitat and BMA, that's the Brussels Bouwmeester, with whom we worked for 2 years on the project Urban Maestro, and then subsequently we reflected on that to produce the book. But I'll come back to that. But if our personal research journeys have been long, it's nothing compared with the provenance of the subject that we have been exploring. Europe has a long history of urbanization, with the first cities dating back some 8,000 years or so. And whilst the formal means of decision-making used to shape the form of early settlements are lost in the mist of time, it's highly likely that from the earliest times, some form of control was enacted on where and how people could build. Some of the earliest actually recorded controls were the reforms of Solon, the lawgiver, from around 600 BC in ancient Greece. And these included guidelines for the spacing and placement of houses, walls, ditches, wells, trees, even beehives. Ancient Rome similarly had its regulations, including one of the very first aesthetic regulations that forbade the demolition of buildings in the countryside because wealthy countryside dwellers didn't like to view the ruins that were being left behind, early NIMBYs perhaps. The medieval world in Europe also had its controls on what we now know as urban design. The first Lord Mayor of London, for example, introduced an assize of buildings in 1189 to encourage construction in brick as a defence against fire. Unfortunately, if the Great Fire of London of 1666 was anything to go by, it wasn't particularly effective. But on the positive side, the London Building Act of 1667 eventually gave rise to the particular look and feel of Georgian London that we see all around us in London's Bloomsbury, where UCL is based. During the 20th and into the 21st centuries, new policy positions and associated regulations multiplied, of course, alongside a greater willingness and expectation that the public sector could and should intervene to shape the built environment in the public interest. The case in point was zoning, which had its origins in Napoleonic France. Here's Napoleon with his zoning tablet, before spreading to Germany and from there to the United States and around the globe, warts and all. Today, a wide range of public interest motivations are apparent for intervening in the design of new development. These diverse motivations have in various ways been written into the public policy agendas of the multiplicity of governance regimes that help to shape the European built environment. They demonstrate that what is meant by design quality in any one place is no narrow concern focused simply on what places look like. Instead, it encompasses a broad and holistic set of considerations that impact on how cities, from buildings to whole places and spaces and cities, are used, experienced, and appreciated by society at large, as well as how interventions subsequently impact on the local economy, society, the environment, and health. In other words, on what I've called elsewhere place value. Yet, as aspirations and regulations have grown and proliferated, corresponding critiques of what we produce have proliferated also. And while such critiques have fed the motivations and led to even greater attempts to regulate for place quality, Europe has predominantly been building urban areas in a manner that have been profoundly unsustainable, and which social attitude surveys suggest is or are often disliked by European citizens. Now, this is locked into how urban areas are shaped, with interlinked systems of investment, knowledge, and regulation producing patterns of development that cannot easily be turned around. American scholars have argued that almost every aspect of the built environment is in some way or other shaped by regulation. But too often, these are limited in their scope, technical in their aspirations, not generated out of any place-based vision, and are imposed on projects and places without regard to outcomes. In Rome, for example, despite more than 2,000 years of experience in regulated design, new residential areas can be built without character or quality, despite the existence of a general urban development plan and comprehensive urban planning standards. In this case, as in many others around Europe, formal regulations are simply not sophisticated enough to deal with all the complexities of urban design when faced with private developers intent on returning a short-term profit at the expense of long-term place value. But clearly, there's a balance to be struck. There are circumstances where clear, simple, and even crude regulations can have a huge and beneficial impact. The negative reaction in the 1970s to the 59-story Montparnasse tower in Paris led to a simple and ultimately successful 37-meter height limit across Paris to preserve the city's horizontal skyline and the dominance of its key historic landmarks. You can see the tower there, the skyline in the image. There were also examples, plenty of examples, where seemingly sophisticated formal rules have failed to create places of distinction. In Copenhagen, a city known for its careful nurturing of urban quality, almost everything that could be seen in the image has been carefully controlled by a complex combination of planning and construction regulations. The result, despite best intentions, is a scheme that feels dull, sterile, and rather desolate. We also need to remember that the public sector is just one actor in how European cities are shaped. As top-down and hierarchical forms of post-war government increasingly gave way to market-led and network governance, a key feature of the neoliberal state has been a waning of direct power vested in the public sector, replaced instead by more diffuse and more indirect means to secure public interests. If previously government played the decisive role, then now decision-making is negotiated and shared between key public and private actors, with the exact balance of power between parties endlessly shifting from place to place and over time. This is fundamental because if the public sector can sufficiently shape the decision-making environment within which decisions on design and development are made, then without actually designing anything itself at all, it may be possible to secure design outcomes that meet all its key public interest aspirations. Yet, as international experiences repeatedly demonstrate, this will not occur by chance or through regulation alone. Instead, it will require the construction of a system of urban design governance with the achievement of holistic design quality at its heart. In other words, a culture of quality. All this forms the backdrop to our study, Urban Maestro, which was fundamentally concerned with tracing and understanding non-regulatory means of engaging in the design of the built environment, or as our strapline phrased it, new governance strategies for urban design. From the start, the project was genuinely collaborative, thanks to all of those on this slide: UN Habitat, the Brussels Baumeister, and of course, from my own institution at UCL. The project itself spanned a tumultuous period encompassing the run-up to and the delivery of Brexit here in the UK, which ultimately didn't really impact on the project, but also the first year of the COVID-19 pandemic, which certainly did. So whilst the first year of our project looked like this, lots of nice site visits, meetings and meals within the team and beyond, the second year was very much like this, in common with much of the rest of the world at that time, of course. In academic terms, Urban Maestro was a piece of qualitative cross-national comparative research and collective learning, which utilised 5 approaches. First, building on earlier research, a European tools-based typology of urban design governance was constructed and tested. I'll come back to that in a moment. This structured a Europe-wide survey of informal urban design governance practices, conducted primarily at the level of nation states across the continent. The survey launched a process of systematically compiling a Europe-wide panorama of innovative practices of informal urban design governance, published at urbanmaestro.org. And from the panorama, a series of more in-depth, more focused case studies of particular practices were conducted, looking at informal urban design governance in order to gain a greater insight into their use in particular places. And these form the basis of a series of workshops with a diverse range of practitioner audiences throughout 2019 and 2020. So, how does the book capture 2 years of work and a further year of reflection by the UCL team? Well, the book is structured itself into 7 chapters, which I'll now briefly explore. I won't say much about the first chapter, as it sets the contemporary discussion of European urban design governance in a historical context, which I've already touched on in this talk. It also brings that discussion right up to date through the history of pan-European policies on architecture, including discussion of recent concepts such as Baukultur and the EU's new European Bauhaus initiative, as well as the beauty agenda here in the UK. No time to discuss any of that now, right? Instead, moving on to chapter 2, as well as discussing the methodological approaches adopted by the Urban Maestro project, the second chapter builds the conceptual basis for the book, summarised in this rather complex diagram. Again, I won't discuss this now. Suffice to say that a range of conceptual distinctions are made in the book, the most important of which is reflected in the book's subtitle and concerns the power behind design governance and whether soft or hard. As the exercise of government has become ever more multi-layered and complex, governments have had to familiarise themselves with a basket of new governance approaches that range from the application of softer influencing powers, we can call those the carrots, to harder lawmaking powers, in other words, the sticks. Rather than the aspirations of government, these represent the means by which government operationalises those ambitions, and there are many more options than may at first be apparent. Furthermore, as these journey from the soft power to the hard power end of the spectrum, they activate tools that move from informal encouraging to tools that are increasingly formal and directive in nature. The different governance regimes that shape the built environment rely on different combinations of hard and soft powers and formal and informal tools. The qualities of the tools that result are often contrasting, with formal tools typically favoured because they are enforceable and notionally at least democratic, although with the downside that they also tend to be time-consuming to create and to use and often inflexible. Across Europe, as elsewhere, more network systems of governance had tended to usher in tools of urban design that sit outside of the formal statutory processes and shape the design decision-making environment through educating, encouraging, and nudging stakeholders towards better design outcomes. These were the particular focus of urban maestro. To help us to understand the range of tools available and their relationships, the third chapter proposes a European typology, the starting point for which reflects two distinguishing features of the tools. First, some tools focus primarily on building a broad culture within which design quality can be prioritised, indirectly shaping the processes of design, whilst others concentrate on directly shaping actual projects and places. Second, while the most widely used tools focus on formally directing decision-making processes relating to the design of projects and places, others use soft powers to informally influence decision-making, from the broad culture of design to the specifics of project. When considered together, these distinguishing features create four potential categorizations of urban design governance tools. Formal quality culture tools, such as design awards. Informal quality delivery tools, such as design competitions. Formal quality delivery tools, such as design codes. And informal quality culture tools. We don't need to worry about the last of these. In fact, we can omit it because, in fact, there is a complete absence of any tools that fit into that category. This leaves three categories into which we were able to fit 9 tool types, although none of the categorizations are hard and fast. Broadly, however, within each category is a transition from lesser to greater engagement, or from passive to more active intervention. Although again, while this is generally the case, it's not always so, as the transition will not always be as clear-cut as a diagram like this suggests. I'll provide some examples in a moment, but before that, we need to recognise how the context for the governance of design vary profoundly from place to place. Chapter 3 captures this idea in the notion of urban design governance landscapes, because any locality is likely to be subject to overlap in urban design governance processes, depending on where and with whom competencies lie. Municipalities each have their own processes, their own network of powers, and of course, their own different physical and social contexts. Overlaying these might be a city or regional authority with separate competencies relating to design, while a nation state itself might also exercise competencies, such as the setting of policy or the allocation of public funding that ultimately impacts on the design locally and its governance. And in continental Europe, an intergovernmental level has also been increasingly coming to the fore. To illustrate this, the chapter maps 3 landscapes: Lisbon, Vienna, and London. And as I'm speaking from London today, let's briefly illustrate this through London's landscape of urban design governance tools. So across most of London, responsibilities for the governance of urban design are split between 3 tiers of government. At the national level, for over a decade, policy, such as you can see on the screen here, on design quality has tended to swing wildly between support for more or less intervention on design, with the latest incarnation of the National Planning Policy Framework advocating a more hands-on and aesthetic vision, care of a national drive for beauty. This is backed by guidance supporting various aspects of policy and setting out a series of normative design principles establishing the scope of the national concern. A range of more arm's length executive agencies of government facilitate delivery, utilising a variety of largely informal tools, such as Building for a Healthy Life, which is a rating system used by, for example, Homes England prior to releasing funding for social housing scheme. And a new unit, Office for Place, is in the process of being set up and is likely to make heavy use of the persuasive powers of government. Turning to the city-wide scale, whilst the role of the mayor is a strategic one, each of the 3 mayors elected since 2000 have been interested in issues of design and public realm quality, and have used a series of soft and hard powers to drive a greater citywide emphasis on these concerns. This has been reflected in a comprehensive range of formal design policies in the London Plan, to which local boroughs need to have regard, and which the mayor uses to determine projects he chooses to call in for mayoral determination. He supplements this agenda in London planning guidance, including recently on issues such as characterisation, optimising site capacity, and preparing design codes for small sites. Transport for London, which also falls under the remit of the mayor, is particularly powerful and undertakes a wide range of analysis and also uses rating tools, for example, its Healthy Streets tool. It uses experimental projects such as the Mini Holland schemes, which we've seen around London, low traffic neighbourhoods in essence, and financial incentivisation tied to design review. TfL also hosts the excellent Urban Design London, with its extensive London-wide training programmes for built environment professionals, whilst the mayor's design advocates deliver design review and offer direct enabling support to local authorities engaged in relevant projects. Although strategic quality aspirations are set from above, much day-to-day responsibility is the role of London's 32 boroughs in the City of London. They are responsible for managing most non-strategic streets and spaces. They establish local planning policy, they conduct development management, some of them run design award schemes, they have significant interest in large numbers of regeneration and increasingly social housing projects, which they use to engage communities in design decision-making, and to establish local design exemplars. And in recent years, an increasing number of London boroughs have also required design review for significant schemes, most directly funded by a charge levied for the service. So, with the total sum of these layers of tools in place, both formal and informal, it's perhaps unsurprising that Greater London came top in the recent housing design audit for England conducted by the Place Alliance, which scored housing-led developments across the country in terms of their design quality. The 3 urban design governance landscapes featured in the book are just 3 of many thousands of such landscapes that could have been chosen, each representing particular cities, municipalities, or simply places across Europe. Nevertheless, each of the chosen cities has been on the same journey, one in which design quality is on the agenda and being prioritised in different ways and to different degrees, with a varied reliance on informal tools that reflects their stage in the overall urban design governance trajectory. What is clear is that where a strong national commitment exists to delivering design quality, this has a powerful impact in either establishing or boosting local ambition, with the ultimate aim of creating a system of layered competencies that can consistently bear down on securing a culture of design quality. At the same time, delivery is almost entirely a local responsibility, and so local ambition is also key to building a sustained local commitment to design quality. All this complexity implies that understanding the collective European urban design governance landscape, if such a thing even exists, represents a challenging, perhaps even an impossible task. This was the reason why the Urban Maestro project adopted an approach to understanding European practices based on the type of tools being used, rather than seeking to understand in detail what forms of governance were leading to which tools and outcomes. Chapter 4 dives into the resulting collective toolbox in some detail, presenting the full panorama of European practices that the Urban Maestro project uncovered, and which can be explored in detail in the website urbanmaestro.org. Now, while the website itself catalogues around 100 initiatives and tools, the book chooses 27 of the most interesting, or simply the most explanatory, in order to interrogate the 6 informal tool categories and the critical related dimension of finance. The concern for finance and its relationship to the governance of design was a key aspect of the Urban Maestro project and is explored in the next chapter. So, returning briefly to the ancient wisdom that I referenced earlier on, Vitruvius, writing in the 1st century BC, called for structures that exhibit firmness, commodity, and delight. Ever since, these have been seen as key essential parameters of good design. However, a 4th criteria of economy should also be added, in the sense of representing and optimizing precious resources, both economic and environmental. But while environmental issues are increasingly integrated into the European urban design governance frameworks from the pan-European scale downwards, economic concerns often are not. At least there's not an obvious link always between finance and design. Whichever tool of urban design governance is selected, there is in fact the potential to use financial means alongside or as part of the urban design governance toolbox to incentivize good design and discourage poor design. Financial means could, for example, encourage the production and use of urban design governance tools, and also promote the aspirations encompassed within them. And typically this occurs as part of formal incentivization processes, but also occurs within the informal support category of tool. This linkage between design and finance, either positive or negative, will be apparent in most development projects, and certainly was in the development-related case studies conducted by Urban Maestro, which included large-scale regeneration projects in Valencia, Oslo, and Copenhagen. Now, significant investments by the public sector in key locations across Europe and the huge private investments these attract offer the ideal opportunity to attach informal design strings to the formal financing of projects. And whilst any financial mechanism might in theory be used for that purpose, Urban Maestro revealed that in practice, some are far more commonly used than others. There's no time to explore these now, except to note that they fit within two larger sets of economic approaches that encompass first the manner in which finance is raised, transferred and applied, and secondly, mechanisms that shape the economic equation that developers have to balance, including tangible regulatory and development incentives if developers demonstrably invest in design quality. Chapter 5 sets out the various financial mechanisms and provides examples of how these are tied to design aspirations through a range of informal urban design governance tools. All this raises a chicken and egg question that is also explored in the chapter 5. Namely, does the availability of finance incentivize good design, or does the promise of good design incentivize finance? In most of the cases examined, the two work together, with a key ambition to create better projects, leading to a desire to deliver approaches that will deliver on that ambition, approaches with a clear finance and design component. Such processes, however, require a pre-existing ambition, and this is only likely to come if a culture of design quality is already in place. Equally, once up and running, the case studies show that the finance and design sides remain mutually reinforcing, with quality already delivered reinforcing the case for and the delivery of more finance and more quality. Moving to the penultimate chapter of the book, the focus shifts to learning from across the range of workshops that sat at the core of the Urban Maestro methodology. Over 2 years, these events brought together practitioners, policymakers, and students from across Europe to explore the varied practices of urban design governance revealed by the project. The aim was both to interrogate the tools and, more importantly, to consider the collective lessons that might be drawn from their use. The results of these discussions are summarised in 20 propositions that are used to structure Chapter 6, including the vital question of how practices travel, or how transferable are practices of urban design governance across a continent where the governance of the built environment is both diverse and complex. As I noted at the start of this presentation, practices of urban design governance under different names have been travelling since ancient times, not always successfully. But while the workshops revealed an obvious strong desire to learn from each other today and to share experiences, the sheer complexity of practices that vary at country, regional, city, and even local municipality level remain a clear barrier. Yet, while such variations make the transfer of hard power tools and approaches particularly challenging, this does not apply to softer forms of tools whose non-statutory nature requires only initiative, ambition, and of course resources to operate. It follows that softer urban design governance tools are more transferable. Which brings us to the final chapter, which does 3 things in order to draw together the various lines of inquiry. First, it identifies common types of urban design governance landscape found across Europe, born of shared cultures, histories, legal systems, and traditions of administration and urban governance. Second, it suggests how the tools deployed within these landscapes can be used in combination, including with financial mechanisms across different stages of the development process. And finally, it identifies 6 fundamental factors that will be important whatever the local circumstances or the tools ultimately chosen to engage with design quality. These are the 6 C's of culture, capacity, coordination, collaboration, commitment, and continuity. All are required and underpin many of the best practices brought together in the book. So to conclude, soft power and hard power tools are not the same. Soft power tools require us to think differently about urban problems, including the design of places. Instead of requiring action, such powers are about nudging stakeholders in the right direction through influencing, convincing, perhaps even seducing them into action. This, of course, can limit their impact, as they don't determine the final actions taken. But if used well, they can change long-term cultures and practices and have the potential for a far greater impact on the quality of places than many formal regulations. The book explains how. Remember, you can download it free from the link on the screen, or you can purchase the book by following that same link. Thank you very much for listening.